Welcome everybody to today's Manitoba Parks webinar. This presentation is being recorded and all participants are in listen-only mode, muted, and cameras are disabled. Over the course of the webinar, please use the chat box for comments, or if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A on the Zoom window, and we will strive to answer as many as we can towards the end of the presentation. So thank you guys all so much for joining us this evening for our Pigs in Space, tracking the reproduction, movements, and spread of invasive wild pigs in Spruce Woods Provincial Park and beyond webinar. So I'm very happy to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Ryan Brooks. Dr. Brook was born and raised on a farm near Dugald, Manitoba, and he did his undergraduate, master's, and PhD at the University of Manitoba, followed by a postdoc in veterinary medicine at the University of Calgary. He started in 2010 at the University of Saskatchewan, and his program focuses on invasive wild pigs, as well as 25 years of working along the Hudson's Bay coast in Wapask National Park. So thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Brook, and I will now pass this over to you.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thanks so much for the invite. I've had virtually completely fantastic internet through the whole COVID affair business for the last 2 full years, and then about 18 minutes before I jumped on here, the whole darn thing failed on me. So I am back in business after some panicky resetting and checking things. So if you see a throbbing vein in my forehead, that's the reason. But really appreciate being in here. Manitoba is home for me and born and raised, and so we are. I've lived across the prairies in numerous places, and now we're smack dab in the middle here in Saskatoon. And so I've been at the University of Saskatchewan for 12 years now. And one of the things that happened when I started was trying to figure out, well, what's a career worth of research going to look like here? And we thought about elk and deer and some of the obvious things, but this whole notion of wild pigs kept sort of pecking away at me. And the more I read and the more I looked, the more nervous I got. And it seemed like that it could end up being a whole career worth of research, which it seems to be doing exactly that. I am going to jump into, what am I going to do? Yeah, I'm going to jump into a PowerPoint first, mainly because I got so flustered. I'm in trouble finding the video I was going to show, but I will eventually calm down and realize what I'm doing wrong there. But I have a few things that I want to do interactive, but I want to talk a little bit about pigs sort of in the background first, and set a bit of context. I'm always a bit surprised by how many people disagree that they even exist. You know, I was going to say getting a haircut. I don't get haircuts anymore. I think I've passed that, hit that stage in my life where I don't need one anymore, but randomly running into people around and telling them what I do and talking about studying wild pigs, and people say, oh, wow, where's that? That's certainly not around here. And I say, well, yeah, there are pigs in Canada, and there are an awful lot on the prairies. And so I'm going to talk about this today as sort of a core area of our research program. So I've been at this for 12 years now, starting off with a few trail cameras and working our way up to a quite intensive GPS collaring program. I'm going to do a little bit of a demo on some of the collar data that we have and some of the occurrence data, and kind of zoom in and have of course, the focus of today, or at least part of the focus, is on Spruce Woods Provincial Park. So we're going to do a bit of a zoom in there, but we're also going to have a look at what's happening across Canada, which has very, very important implications for what happens in Spruce Woods and in Manitoba and beyond. And I will have my chat turned on. Oops, I only teach on Zoom every single day. So, oh, here we go. It's a little bit different. Okay, I got my chat pulled up there, so I'm ready to take any questions as people post them. And yeah, feel free to post away, and I'll do my best to answer as we go. If you're interested in learning more, if you want to see more videos and photos and maps and learn where pigs are, which a lot of people, that's one of the most common questions we get, is where are the pigs? I want to go shoot one. Well, it is indeed perfectly legal to shoot them across the Canadian prairies. And while I'll get into a bit of why it's not particularly helpful in the process of trying to get rid of them, it is indeed perfectly legal. And I do get a lot of help and support from hunters, and in turn I do my bit by providing maps and information for anybody. And mapping has certainly been a big part of our process. But feel free to follow me on Twitter for some hilarious takes on wild pigs, and our wild pig project online on Facebook there for for maps and updates and loads of information there. And the pinned tweet will actually allow you to download some of the interactive maps I'm going to talk about today. So let's go back to the very beginning. There are no native pigs to Canada. So anything that's running around the landscape that looks like a pig and oinks like a pig is indeed an invasive pig of some type. Now we use, there is a bit of confusion here in that they do come from wild boar stock. And so this whole story in Canada starts in the 1980s. And there was a big push to diversify agriculture in Canada. And there was this idea that we had to get away from dairy cows and chickens and pigs and get into exotic things like elk and emu ranches and wild boar farms. And so there were a lot of farms spread around. Virtually all of the provinces in Canada at least dabbled in wild boar farming, and Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, Quebec went quite whole hog, if you will, into it, and brought in these. So European wild boar, domestic farmed animals, were brought over from Europe to stock these farms through the 80s and into the 1990s. And there was a big push to see this as an opportunity both to serve high-end restaurants and have wild boar on the menu, but also to have a large hope. The big hope was to ship these internationally into Asia and send big freezers full of boar meat to Japan, for example. And so they arrived as wild boar, which are there, and I'll show you a map in a bit, but wild boar are native to Europe, Asia, and a bit of North Africa. And so outside of that range, they've been introduced. And when they were brought over, many of the experts said, if you want a bigger wild boar, cross it with a domestic pig. And that's what happened in almost all cases. Despite what some may claim, there are very, very few true wild boar. And some of them arrived already crossbred to a point. And there was a lot of crossbreeding with domestic pigs here in Canada when they arrived. And as you may not know, but now you know, many of the adaptations that have been bred into your domestic pink pig is they have an extra set of ribs. So they're actually a little bit longer. They have much larger litter sizes typically, and they're a much bigger animal, more frequent breeding, and indeed have bigger piglets. So lots and lots of reasons why adding a bit of genetics, or in some cases a lot of genetics, from a range of domestic pigs could turn them into what we often refer to as super pigs. And so it was a good production move. Unfortunately, it turned them into the ideal invasive species. So bigger, more reproductive animal is exactly what you don't want when you're trying to deal with an invasive species like this. And make no mistake, these are the worst invasive large mammal on the planet. If you sat down, a bunch of experts sat down and sort of rattling off, okay, what would, if you wanted to design the ultimate invasive species, well, it would basically, you draw a wild pig and then go for lunch and call it a day, because these things are truly well adapted to living across a huge range of environments. And you see them in the deserts of Mexico, and then as far as 58.5 north in Canada. So not that far from 60 degrees north. So they survive a broad range of conditions. And so this is what it looks like on farm. And so they were raised through the 80s and 90s. And certainly we've purchased meat from them. They have sold it at the Saskatoon farmers market before, and it's tasty and good and nice and lean, and you cook it carefully and it's brilliant. And so there are no real major concerns when they're inside the fence. The problem was them getting out. And that's where things started to go sideways. We have observations of pigs outside of a fence as early as 1995, and we'll see how that exploded pretty rapidly from there. But basically, two things happened. There was always escapes, and for example, Saskatchewan government talked about years ago about approximately 2 to 3% escape rate, and they'd go under fences, through fences, and a good hardy prairie winter, and you get a big drift in one corner of a fence, and animals just walk right out. There was also some really interesting stories about pigs floating out in Manitoba. I remember the flood of the century. I was working for Ducks Unlimited at Okamic Marsh at that time, and the flood of the century hit, and every hour I wasn't working or helping on the farm, I was out sandbagging. And there were stories of big floods coming in and literally, and of course these things swim amazingly well. And so they just sort of floated out over top of the fence, and so it wasn't intentional. These were just animals that zipped out. Yeah, someone says humans might be arguably the most invasive species. Point well taken. In terms of non-humans, I'll say I'll call pigs that. But yes, humans may be the most destructive invasive large mammal on the planet. Fair enough. Take that well. So yeah, so we had animals that escaped, that were flooded out or floated out, I should say. And unfortunately, in a number of cases, when the market died or collapsed, I guess is the correct word, it really did go south pretty badly. The prices weren't there, the markets weren't there, and there just wasn't the infrastructure and the sort of the sheer numbers to support a big industry of shipping to Europe. And so around 2001, the market collapsed for wild boar on farms, and many people unfortunately cut the fence and let them go. And that's been a big root of the problem. And it is indeed an ongoing issue. This isn't gone yet. Two of my summer students 2 years ago showed up at a wild boar farm in a location I will not name. It was not in Manitoba or Saskatchewan for that matter, but pulled up and every piglet under 40 pounds ran through the fence and met them in the driveway. So there are ongoing issues and challenges with that. They're not easy to keep inside a fence for sure. So this is a snapshot. We use Canada Ag Census data. It's fantastic. It's systematic, really well collected, super useful data to help us understand a lot of things. And one of those things actually is the Ag Census recorded the number of farms and the number of animals on farms through the Ag Census. Unfortunately, the number dropped so low after 2009 that they no longer collect wild boar specific, or at least they don't share wild boar specific data. I don't even think they ask. I think they just talk about exotics. But for a long time, it was mapped. And so we have published a paper here. You can have a look on your own time if you're so interested. Got the name and title there, but our group looked at this, and production peaked in Canada at about 32,000 animals on about 500 farms, according to Stats Canada. And you can see, of course, Manitoba definitely did more than just dabble in it, and then widespread across the Canadian prairies. Make note of this little black spot in Saskatchewan. This comes up later and is important in that as of right now today, there are more invasive wild pigs in what is this black square inside here now than there are in the rest of Canada combined. So it is a major, major hotspot for invasive pigs. So the link is there. Where did pigs come from? Well, they came from these farms. There's no really other source. There have been very rare occurrences of wild pigs along the US border. North Dakota's had a few, and they've dealt with them, but quite recently. And so there are a few potential spots, but very, very rare. The northern US states have been low, and they've invested millions of dollars to keep it that way. And so the only real explanation is they came from these farms. And of course, we do know the story through lots of interviews and discussions with people about this, and knowing their neighbors just cut the fence and let it go. So this is the beginning of the story, and unfortunately, it's been a challenge ever since. And when we first started looking at this in 2010, I had a very modest startup grant from the university. We bought some trail cameras, and many people did not believe they exist. Many people still tell me they don't exist. And so for a long time, it's felt a lot like studying Sasquatch, where when nobody even believes what you're doing. It sounds like, or it feels an awful lot like a Sasquatch type of situation. That's changed now. So many people seeing them, so many pigs spreading rapidly. It has.
Excuse me, Dr. Brook.
Yes.
Are you sharing anything? We just can't see anything on the screen right now.
I'm not showing my map. I really, really swear to everybody that I'm not an idiot, and I actually teach using Zoom almost every damn day. Obviously, sorry about that. I've got a map. I really have some nice pictures. I'll back and show them. There's a nice picture. There's a map. Apologies, folks. I literally am that stupid. So thanks for reminding me. And I promise you that I'm not completely useless. What was the flood? That was 1997 was the flood of the century, Michelle. Oh, Carrie said, yep, 97, 96, which is the wrong answer, I believe. What times of year do wild boar tend to breed? Good question, Michael. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to answer that in some detail right up ahead here. Does the winter significantly impact survival of piglets? We don't know the specific answer about piglet survival very well, but from the data that we have and many thousands of trail camera photos, it doesn't look like there is that much mortality at any stage. So yes, I am sharing. Thanks. Oh my God, the chat has been filling up. Thanks for letting me know, and I will strive to reestablish my credibility in this. I've literally talked about pigs many hundreds of times. So anyway, that's how my brain works. So to sort of follow up on this notion of wild boar versus wild pigs, I think it's a bit confusing. I have for many years now, and our whole research group has really stuck to this notion of wild pigs, because the reality is that if you, and we have ears from pigs across the prairies, we have hundreds of ears, and we take samples and we send them for genetic analysis, and we know that there are very few, if any, true wild boar running around the landscape on the Canadian prairies right now, anything that's free ranging. And many people will advertise, there are, not in Manitoba, Manitoba banned fenced hunts, so probably around 2003, 2004, or something like that. It's been a while, but in Saskatchewan, Alberta, Quebec, there are still these penned hunts. And those folks advertise Polish wild boar. Many people talk about Russian wild boar. I'm here to tell you there's probably no such thing in North America. But it sounds great, and people will show pictures of different looking pigs, but the reality is these are all, if you see a pig outside of a fence running around, then it's some kind of wild pig. And if you look at this one photo, this is not too long ago taken, and you see the two front animals that look like wild boar. They've got the long drawn out nose, they're covered in kind of a gray brown hair. It's a night photo, so it's not as clear, but you look behind that, there's a really nice shiny pig right behind them that looks quite white, and indeed that's a pink Yorkshire pig, pure Yorkshire pig, not a bit of wild boar genetics whatsoever. And then the one behind it, if you see there's some with spots there, you could see that's surely a hybrid. And then of course the ones on the right, you can see different color phases. We see a lot of red colors in Manitoba. Red is fairly common, but we do see some that look more like true wild boar. Spotting is not uncommon in the hybrids, and of course some animals jet black, and indeed some pigs that we see on the landscape that are just pure pink, and may well be mostly, if not entirely, just pure pig genetics. So certainly really emphasizing this notion that wild pigs is the way to go, because it's a catch-all for all of this mess that's going on in these photos. We do see lots of crossbreeding. People have crossbred with domestic potbelly pigs as well. And this is another story and a whole other talk on its own, but potbelly pigs are becoming more and more of a thing. I had a call from someone about a year and a half ago of potbelly pig running around Winnipeg and not sure who to call or how to deal with such a thing. Animal Services didn't want to deal with it. They were dealing with stray cats and dogs. Potbelly pigs are showing up in the pet industry, people buying a mini pig or a teacup pig as a pet, and they put it in their purse or carry it around their backpack and live in a one-bedroom apartment in St. Vital, and it's great until the thing hits 140, 150 plus pounds. And then you see on Kijiji and lots of these sites, people begging, please take my enormous pig. I can't raise it in the city. And so people do get scammed quite a lot by these so-called mini pigs, which turn out to be quite large. And unfortunately, and growing up just outside of Winnipeg, we rarely ever bought pets, or even most of them just showed up. So we were only 20 miles east out near Dugald, and people would drive out all the time and just dump dogs and cats out in the country. And so I remember distinctly as a kid hearing something outside and opened the door, and a dog ran between my legs and came inside and fell asleep right by the TV and never left. And so we did have a lot of dogs and cats that just showed up on their own. And unfortunately, this is also occurring with potbelly pigs. It's a national and international problem. Spain has a huge issue with it. Several northern US states have issues, and there are farms all around North America trying to take in as many of these potbelly pigs as possible, but they're getting overrun. So it's a bit of a complex situation. Yeah, the wild pig are taking over places in Europe as well. Yeah, numbers are huge. Yeah, in Paris, or pardon me, in France alone, some years they kill 1 million wild boar. Those numbers have also increased in native range. Australia has something like 17 million wild pigs. Texas has probably between 3 and 4 million. The US certainly has north of 7 million pigs across the continental US. So they have, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, across much of their global range, they've expanded dramatically. And we can see why as an exotic species, and especially when you crossbreed and make a super pig that's got all this wonderful hybrid vigor from being crossed with a domestic pig, that certainly explains some of it. But even in their native range, they are a problem, although hybridization has been an ongoing issue in many areas of Europe. So yes, there was a potbelly pig running around Winnipeg. I can send you details if you want to email me. I had my email up front. I can give it again if you like, but could certainly follow up. There have been a number of sightings of potbellies around for sure. So it is an ongoing issue. How do you spot them? They're very hard to spot. There are many people with various degrees of anger call me and say, I've hunted this area of this place for the last 45, 50, 60, 70, whatever years. And I don't know what you're talking about. There's no pigs here. And I'll say, well, I'm sorry to tell you, but there's actually 4 GPS collared pigs in that area right now as we speak. And so it's a little bit of an awkward conversation, but they're there. They're highly elusive. They hide. These are pigs actually in what we often refer to as a nest. And all it is sort of settling down into some soil and vegetation. They will burrow into the snow, and they will sleep under snow and form a shelter in there. And they will sleep under big spruce trees. We've seen a lot of that, use a spruce tree as shelter, and also completely buried under the soil. And so we see these nests, these cattail nests. Pigs rely very heavily on wetlands for food in summer, but also for cattails for insulation. So these razor sharp tusks, they cut down large numbers of cattails and make nests like this. And they also use them to cattail marshes. As many people know, if you're snowshoeing along and you're walking, you step onto cattails and woof, you drop 3 feet. There's big, thick, fluffy snow in those cattail marshes, holds that snow. So it's a perfect place to tunnel into the thick snow, and they will carry cattails in and make nests inside. So they are fairly common. And we do see this is just one of many impacts we'll talk about from pigs. And this is an aerial photo looking down. There's a GPS collared animal in there somewhere with quite a number of piglets. I'm trying to remember, I think 7 in that particular case. There's one main quote unquote nest here, and then one little one just to the lower right there, just beside it. And so that's been heavily used by pigs. That's churned up vegetation. I think there might have been a hay bale or 2 there. There's probably some hay mixed in that was used as a bait site. But the challenge, of course, is that, traditionally, Manitoba provincial government flies surveys, and they have this design, and you fly back and forth. And they happened in Riding Mountain National Park when I lived and worked there for many years, and was lucky enough to participate in a couple of them. And you fly back and forth, and you count the moose and the deer. And this is, standard methods around North America, and it's done effectively across Manitoba to give data to support understanding population trends. It doesn't work here because the darn things are under the snow, hiding under a spruce, or buried underground. So if you fly and count, you're probably almost certainly going to way undercount them. So they are incredibly elusive and super, super smart, and creates a real challenge. A group of pigs we often refer to as a sounder or sounder group. And that's typically a mature female. We do know one case of an animal that lived up to 13 years. It had somebody in New York State shot a pig, and it had an ear tag in it that said Melfort, Saskatchewan, and it was a health of animal tag. And so this was a domestic pig that was raised on a farm near Melfort, shipped to a game farm in New York State. It escaped and then lived for several years in the wild before ultimately being shot. And it was So based on the H of A tag, it was at least 13 years old. And so that's the oldest sort of Canadian story that I know of, but could be 15 or more years. And so we know this lead sow travels with typically her daughters, great granddaughters, and great great granddaughters in these groups. This is a rather large sounder of pigs, but I've done a bit of back of the napkin calculation, and this group weighs probably a little bit more than an F-150 pickup truck. And so when a lot of people say, well, we'll just go out and shoot them and hunters will take care of it, this photo tells us no, that's incredibly challenging to do, and almost never, even in smaller sounder groups, almost never do sport hunters find and remove entire groups. So there are some problems there. And also you say, well, maybe a nice Manitoban black bear will limit the population, or even a pack of wolves. I think I was lucky enough to see lots of packs of wolves in Riding Mountain. I think 17 was the most I ever saw in one group at one time there. And so even that's a big pack with a lot of muscle and a lot of teeth, but would they want to tangle with these highly, highly aggressive pigs with these razor sharp tusks? I think they would probably choose to avoid that and chase whitetail and moose. And I think they'd much rather take on the challenge of a moose than a big sounder of pigs. Males are quite different. They tend to be solo, especially the big mature males, and they move around. And because these pigs are continuously reproducing, so we actually, from some of our research, and of course many others, we know with great detail when elk calving season occurs in Manitoba, for example, and it's May, June, and we have that sorted out pretty well. And one of the things we wrote up a while ago was the babysitting service that occurs in Riding Mountain, where female elk go out to Whitewater Lake and use that island and drop off their calves for the day with barren females and go feed onshore around the lake and come back and pick them up later. And so there's a lot of, I think we know quite a bit about reproduction in these on our native deer, elk, moose, caribou. And it occurs in a very narrow season, so almost unheard of to see calves being born outside of that narrow window in the spring. And if they're born late, then their chances of survival are low anyway. Throw all that away and forget everything you knew about wildlife in a sense, and apply it to these wild pigs, which reproduce continuously. They have a short gestation period, which is 3 months, 3 weeks, 3 days. And so that occurs very quickly. We don't really understand weaning that well in Canadian pigs. We just don't have data on it yet, but it happens fairly quickly. And then those young animals actually become sexually mature. It varies a lot on habitat and genetics, but these pigs with domestic in them can become sexually mature at 4 to 6 months, probably actually breeding more like 8 or 9 months. But you do the math on that, and the going from one bred sow to 100 pigs can occur in a few years. Because of course you take the one, you have average litter size is 6. So you have 6 born, roughly 130, 150 days later, there's a whole nother litter being born. And then by that time, that first litter is already starting to become sexually mature. And so the ability for them to expand is legendary. They have incredibly high reproductive capacity, and it is continuous. There is very little overall trend to that. What can you use for hunting wild boar? The only thing that I would ever recommend or consider would be a high-powered rifle, or if you were sort of fortunate or really experienced, a 12-gauge shotgun with slugs. And indeed, people that hunt them a lot that I know in Saskatchewan actually use both, and we'll have people with high-powered rifles, but they will also have 2 or 3 people with 12-gauge shotguns protecting the shooters. Because if you really want to scare yourself, go on YouTube and look up wild boar charge. And so if you shoot at some of these animals, and especially with bigger groups, they don't run away like a whitetail or other animals. They will, as often as not, will actually charge you. And so they can be quite dangerous. And you see, especially that one animal in the front in this picture, you see those nice big razor sharp tusks. And when you're holding them on the ground, when we're handling them, those 2 tusks are constantly moving, rubbing back and forth against each other on the leading edge. and I barely ever stop moving. Those teeth are constantly tight against each other, so they are razor sharp. And in fact, we did have one of our crew get zapped, got a little bit too close, and she said, "Oh, it got me." And everybody said, "What are you talking about? What got you? What happened?" Nobody saw it. The pilot was filming it with his phone and didn't even see it. And we had to go back in slow-mo and see that, yeah, they lift their head up and they try and get you on the inside of the leg where your femoral artery is. So they can be very aggressive, and definitely have to be careful when you work around them, for sure. And if you're hunting them, high-powered rifle is basically the only way to go. And people have talked to me about spearing them, and because there is, I guess, some older approaches where you get an animal to charge you and then have a huge spear, and it basically impales itself when it charges. But I can't underscore enough how ridiculous that notion would be and how dangerous it would be, especially when you've got a big group like this. There's a lot going on. So yeah, so that's certainly a real challenge for sure. So big sounder, lots going on. Big males are traveling around the landscape, and so we have been fortunate to be able to put GPS satellite collars on pigs and track them. And we know that, you know, a big male, even just over the course of a single summer, a big home range is over 400 square kilometers, and that's like 10 to 20 or 30 times or more bigger than home ranges on a lot of the other studies we've done. And for example, I spent a lot of time studying wild pigs at Riding Mountain, or pardon, not wild pigs, studying elk at Riding Mountain for my PhD and living in Dauphin. They do taste quite good, especially when they're young. Males will, unless they were escaped from a farm, we have caught animals that were castrated that escaped from farm or were released, but the majority of these will be born and raised now in the wild, and they will taste terrible. That boar taint is probably about 2/3, maybe 70% of us, and I'm included, are sensitive to that boar taint, and yeah, that smell will truly haunt your nightmares. And so if you shoot a female or younger animals, they can be exceedingly good and tasty. So yes, possible there. But again, thinking we'll talk more about that when it comes to control, and this notion that sport hunting is unfortunately not going to get us there. 6 young per litter, these characteristic cream colored stripes you see on them, and the timing of losing those stripes corresponds about to sexual maturity. So once the stripes are gone, they're probably taking them out to, you know, when the stripes disappear, that's about the same time that matches up with sexual maturity. But yeah, very high, 6 young per litter. Often we don't have a great handle on exactly how common this is, but we're very confident with some of the data and trail photos showing that females with multiple litters, and so 2 litters per year is certainly not unheard of. This is trail camera data from Manitoba and Saskatchewan from a number of years ago. I had an undergraduate thesis, a student work on this, Bailey Brazeau, and she showed that there were detections of, one thing she did was develop a set of photos from domestic wild boar from birth, a very known date of birth, across till they were sexually mature. And that worked quite well in terms of being able to come up with a guide to aging them. We're also fortunate to get some sets of trail camera photos of a known litter that showed up at a bait site at one particular spot when they were barely days old, and then kept returning until they were big, enormous brutes. So we do have some quite good data for aging. It obviously varies a lot on what they're feeding and time of year. You know, in the fall when there's egg crops everywhere, high quality foods, they will gain faster than they will in the winter, for sure. But access to egg is a big issue in wildlife, and we talk a lot about this notion of an egg subsidy that we know occurs across the prairies, and animals are feeding extensively. And you know, in the US, for example, they talk about $2.5 billion worth of crop damage a year. So really intensive cost there for sure, and big potential impacts. We're not seeing that massively, but you talk to some producers, as we've done, you know, right along the southern edge of the Spruce Woods Park, and they say, well, we're not growing corn here anymore. We just can't. The pigs are just hitting it too hard. And my summer students a few years ago, when they went there, their very first day, they were driving up to the south end of the park, and there was a pig shot in a cornfield right beside the road and just left there. And so that was a bit of a surprise for them. But so there is perhaps a little bit of seasonality in terms of when these piglets are born, but we can now, when you have a known age of any piglet in any trail camera photo, you can estimate the date of birth and then backtrack it also to the date of conception, because we know it's basically 115 days plus or minus about a day, maybe 2 days at most, from conception to birth. And so we have quite a lot of insight into this now. And talking about these pigs in 2010 was hard because we had no data, and people were asking, like, do they even exist? Is that even a thing? And so we've gone from testing the hypothesis that pigs exist on the prairies to the next one was are they reproducing in the wild? A lot of people say, well, yeah, they're running around, but those are escapees. A good quality, cold, freezing Manitoba winter will knock them right back. And of course, that exactly did not happen. These animals are highly, highly adapted to living in snowy environments and cold, and they put on a huge amount of body condition through spring, summer, and fall, and they can go through periods of extreme cold and limited access to food and survive pretty well. Certainly, we do expect probably there is some, and these long cold snaps, the piglets are going to be the ones that suffer the most. They don't have 85, 100 plus pounds of body fat on them to survive a winter. So if things got really bleak and snow is really accumulated, they will still go out and forage, but they can be a real challenge for young ones. So there might be some mortality there, but we see, we have so many photos across all seasons of piglets at heel with females. Now, this is not a population count. We do not have a good estimate of numbers. I've been pretty reluctant to put out a number until we have better data. But two things about this graph. One is this is classic exponential curve and shows what happens with pigs. And this is exactly what you expect to happen. Anything other than this growth would be shocking, because everywhere else on the planet where we have them, especially when they're invasive, they explode. We talked about Australia, 17 million. The US numbers have just blown up, 7+ million animals. And so they reproduce massively. So 6 young per litter on average. Multiple litters per year, living up to perhaps 13 years, major exponential growth. And of course, as we know with those curves, it starts small. So our first known sighting was in 95. And so there really wasn't a lot going. But what is important and notable about Manitoba was that Manitoba was really proactive on this. And I really want to give a shout out there that in the early days, when this was still, there were pigs around and people talked about it and there was some concern, and nowhere near the attention or numbers that there was. Manitoba was certainly very, very proactive and declared the whole province as a control zone. And I know there was a lot of efforts. I remember running into some of the biologists like Rob Bruce, and those folks were putting out GPS collars to try and do Judas pig technique, and that was a long time ago. And so they were on this quite early, and I give them credit for that. But these pigs, despite all of that, have continued, they were simmering along. And so when I started on this in 2010, there still wasn't a lot of pigs out there as far as we could tell, and not a lot of people seeing them. They were out there, and we know that, for example, Spruce Woods, people say that certainly there's been a reasonably large population for at least 15 years. But they are very elusive, and we have struggled and continue to struggle even in 2022 with this notion that out of sight, out of mind, and people just not seeing them. And so very few people believe me when I tell them how many we see, but you could see this exponential curve, and these are occurrences. And so we collect data from GPS collars, we collect them, we have run our own trail cameras in the past, and we have collected a lot, indeed a few thousand of our photos actually come from people, landowners, hunters, whoever's running their own trail cameras. And so anybody that runs cams or sees them and has a confident observation, we would love to hear about it. And we would definitely love to see those trail cam photos as part of our database and research. That helps a lot. And so we've seen this exponential curve. And again, this is across all the Canadian prairies. This isn't Manitoba specific, but certainly we have 60,000 unique occurrences of wild pigs in our database right now across all of Canada. the overwhelming majority, more than 3/4, are in Saskatchewan and Manitoba combined. And so Saskatchewan has 53%. So by far, Saskatchewan is by far the hotspot, but Manitoba is not that distant second. There are quite a few in Alberta, but certainly Manitoba, Saskatchewan are the overwhelming majority right now today, and have been for some time. And of course, most notably, and when you see this exponential curve, is exactly what one would expect. And while it's a bit, it's impactful, it's kind of causes certainly some real significant concern, and should indeed. And I think that is part of my message. We should be worried about this, and we should be, really taking full-blown action on this. But this is exactly what we would expect. We saw, you'd see a very, very similar curve for many US states. You'll see a similar curve in Mexico and Australia, and in many other places as well. So this is 58% of all of the occurrences were just in the last 5 years. So that, and what's really, to put that in perspective, their first one was in 95, but in 2002, there were 0 locations in our entire database. None. And so we went from 2002, wasn't that long ago, that was exactly 20 years ago. And so 20 years ago, across all of Canada, in our entire database, and all of the work we've done, literally thousands of hours of up until 2017, my PhD student, Ruth Asham, and I'll show some of her work in a bit here, did a majority of the dog work of collecting this, and then myself and others have kept it going. But we're seeing a couple thousand, more than 2,000, 2,500, whatever, in recent years, and even more so now. But yet we had none that we were aware of in 2002. So this is a very recent, and it speaks to the tremendous capacity of wild pigs to expand. And this is where I think the concern comes from. And so Ruth, for her first PhD paper, which you can search this title and download it as a free download. It is open access. She mapped out what we call level 9 watersheds. And as many of you may know, watersheds in Canada are mapped out at different levels, from the watershed that feeds into the Hudson Bay lowlands that covers, I don't know, what is it, over 1 million square kilometers or something, massive watersheds at different scales for different purposes. And so we chose level 9 because that matches up pretty closely to what we know to be the home range size of an individual wild pig. And of course, watersheds make sense because they do, to a point, follow watersheds. So each one of these little red blobs represents a known case or a known occurrence of wild pig in one of those level 9 watersheds. And so we've used that consistently across our study. And so that was up till 2000. There were not much, as I say, it is notable that people were taking action during this time before it was a thing, before it was a cause for panic. But we knew, and this is a good example of precautionary approach, where you take action not because it's a problem today, but because from other jurisdictions and the biology, they are going to do like they do everywhere else and expand out of control. So this was good proactive management, absolutely. Now let's see, go to the next one. So 2001 to 2010, and this is when I actually started at the U of S, and we started really ramping up our research. But during that period, there were clearly watersheds around. Interlake had a number of them, and some places. Beausejour was a bit of a hot spot. Some of those, I believe, were, according to the stories we've heard, some of those were cases of animals that floated out during the flood. And then, of course, are down towards Spruce Woods. But Saskatchewan and Alberta had some, and there were a number in BC. But then by 2017, when Ruth stopped her data collection, we had some fairly widespread. And we had a few in Ontario, but Ontario hadn't really been looking and thinking about this too much. And about 3 years ago, I went out there and did a bit of a speaking tour and met with a bunch of government agencies and folks, and they started looking, and they actually have found a number of wild pigs, and they've really ramped up, and in fact are showing real strong leadership in Canada on the wild pig file, and taking some pretty bold steps to eliminate and stay pig free. So there's a good model there I think, and some good examples as well. But you can see pigs starting to show up. These are just occurrences, so we have to interpret that with some caution. Just because you saw a pig and that turned red doesn't mean you're overrun with pigs. It doesn't even mean that you necessarily still have pigs. And so some of the research we're doing now is digging deeper and saying, okay, well, how many occurrences were there total over how many years? And so you can imagine one of these watersheds, or several of these watersheds, have had pigs detected every year in the last 15 years. And one of the other criteria that we use to be consistent with the US, if you the criteria is often, if you want to talk about established wild pigs, populations, then you want to show evidence of reproduction. And so we're working on that right now, and using all those trail camera photos with piglets at heel to now identify, okay, which of these watersheds had lots of occurrences over many years and show reproduction. And some of them have, we have trail camera photos for 15 years of lots of piglets. And so we have some major hotspots. And if you remember early on when I started talking, and I thought, hopefully you saw that map that I didn't turn on and I was staring at and quite proud of, but there was a little highlight black spot right here in Saskatchewan where it was the hotspot for wild boar farming. And indeed, as I say, in this area, there are now more free-ranging wild pigs in this area than the rest of Canada combined. We have huge established numbers. And that's a problem for Saskatchewan, but the proximity to Manitoba is also a concern. And one of the things that you learn even from this 2017 map is one of the challenges of managing pigs is that it goes beyond Manitoba. And so Manitoba can do lots and lots of things right, but still have some risk of pigs from Saskatchewan, which is the hotspot, especially along that Manitoba-Saskatchewan border. Someone said there's a correlation. Is there a correlation in the last 5 years of popularity of hunting groups on Facebook? Spruce Woods become a hotbed of online discussion. Exponential increase in hunters in the last 5 years. More hunters, more cameras, more occurrences. Yeah, that's a great question. That is, that's something we need to consider when we go through these data and do our analyses. And some of that increase is surely more effort. And of course, if you think back to 20 years ago, not that many trail cameras were still kind of cool and kind of new and fairly pricey. But now everybody got one for Christmas or something for the last few years. So they're absolutely part of that, but we've used other independent data sets and we show that same exponential curve. For example, if you look at all of the bounty data, the Alberta had a bounty. We take that data, exponential curve. You look at some of the other observations and techniques. I think that there is an iterative notion or an iterative component to that, in that hunters are smart. I don't know why I'm laughing about that. Hunters don't want to go tromping around along the Churchill area looking for wild pigs because nobody believes that there are any. And in all of our data sets, I will say the overwhelming majority of our database is in and around the Spruce Woods. Over the last few years, though, we have seen it look more like a shotgun blast, where what looks quite, and again, shouldn't be a surprise, pigs expanding out from Spruce Woods. So Spruce Woods is a hub, and then spokes of that wheel go in all directions. And so I think it's fair to say what's happening is that we do have a stronghold of wild pigs in and around the Spruce Woods, and that has expanded. There have been some sightings in the Turtle Mountains. What a lot of locals say is there were, and then it seemed that they were shot away and gone, but now there's been a few more recently. There is not, and never seems to have been a big abundance or a stronghold at the Turtle Mountains. Spruce Woods is the place to go. And so, and we'll do a bit more of a deep dive into that in a bit, although I continue to talk. We're going to run out of time, but we've got a lot of great questions, which is fantastic. Wild boar farms is great. And in fact, Saskatchewan announced today, or this week, I should say, that they put a moratorium on any new wild boar farms in the province. Although my joke was that it's sort of like putting a moratorium on, oh geez, I've lost the lost the joke and wrecked it. What was it? What's the old video stores that used to go? Blockbuster. It was like putting a moratorium on Blockbuster video stores because there aren't that many people really interested in getting into it, except the occasional person who wants to do the pinned hunt. But Ontario actually, again, shown some really bold leadership, but also they don't have a lot, so it's an easier thing to do. But in there, they have a really nice strategy they put out. And part of that is that as of 2022, not only no new farms, but all the existing ones have to go as well. So they've really put the hammer down. And we know that wild boar farms have been the source. There's no question about that, and continue to a point. Although we are seeing the amount of reproduction we're seeing in the wild, the actual contribution of those farms is relatively small, but it's also the low-hanging fruit. Finding and removing all of these pigs from Manitoba or across Canada is a tremendous challenge. I think everybody recognizes that, but putting some kind of controls on farms and what Saskatchewan said is no new farms, and now we're finally going to regulate the existing farms. And so I think certainly increased fencing. Alberta did a wonderful job about 5 years ago of implementing much more stringent containment rules, including high voltage electric fence as a requirement. So that's pretty good. Yeah, there was a bounty in Alberta for quite some time. They killed over 1,000 animals, spent a lot of money, but unfortunately, it did give a lot of information of where pigs are. But bounties in general, I'm not a fan of, and generally are not a good strategy for controlling wild populations, especially pigs. So I would not consider myself an advocate of bounties or any of those. They tend to spend a lot of money, but not accomplish a lot. Here's an updated 2022 map of watersheds, and you just see more of the same and more expansion. And again, there's a lot of red in Manitoba. And so, I mean, I'll be honest, I struggle a little bit on how to use these maps and share this information, and we don't want to cause hysteria. This doesn't mean that this whole red zone is overrun with pigs. And for example, there's a watershed here. A friend of mine was at Nunavik Lake in July and phoned me and said, I just hit a pig. It's sitting on the side of the road in Nunavik, right just off the main road there. So that's one animal in one watershed. Obviously, in the Southwest is where the overwhelming majority of the issue is. And so I provided some I think I ended up being 7 or 8 pages of feedback towards this national strategy that's being worked on in Canada. And one of the things I talked a bit about was this idea that, the low-hanging fruit in Manitoba is essentially anything east of Winnipeg. And designated that as a control zone might be a good thing to think about as an option for control, because it is the low-hanging fruit. There are not a lot of pigs there, we know that. So this map can be an issue. I'm not a supporter of contraception, because if you have an animal in hand, it's better, and it's not my nature, but generally speaking, it's better to just euthanize it. Problem with any kind of conception and control is those animals can still spread disease and spread around the landscape and cause all sorts of problems. This is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but this maps all the watersheds where we've seen eradication in Canada. We have not seen any, is the point here. And so we're still, I think there's been a fundamental change in the last 2 years in perceptions at all levels of government and across, hunting and all circles, recognizing wild pigs, and things have changed fundamentally in all sorts of ways. But we still have a lot of pigs, and they are still reproducing. And during the time we've had this discussion, almost certainly a few litters have hit the ground being born as we're discussing this, given the sheer numbers and spread. And that's not based on any actual data, but just given the frequency of reproduction, I don't think that's necessarily cause for alarm. But here in Saskatchewan, we have 54% of all the occurrences. And so this emphasizes the cross-border notion of this. And this isn't a Manitoba population and a Saskatchewan, it's a prairie population. And the overwhelming majority of our points of occurrence, and you can of course see Spruce Woods there as that shotgun blast, and they are expanding. We've done work looking at their risks and impacts on a number of ways. And we've just been most recently just wrapping up some work for Riding Mountain, developing a risk model for Riding Mountain National Park around occurrences of wild pigs. So lots of stuff. I did a risk assessment for the Northwest Territories. They're pig free and they want to stay that way. So I did a comprehensive risk assessment for them. So they are expanding out of control. They're, they occurrences are found within 1 million square kilometers of Canada. And so I do want to emphasize the size and scale of this. They are currently tied to agriculture in a very big way. And so that's really important to note. But that's where they started, right? Farms were, they were farmed in areas of agriculture. So we shouldn't be shocked. We also know they rely on agriculture tremendously as food and cause a lot of damage. Some stomachs we've cut open and they're just full of nothing but canola. So no surprise at ag, but you're starting to see black dots. This one in Saskatchewan, a few in Manitoba, that one in the white shell from this past summer. I mean, that's super bizarre one up by Pine Falls. Clearly, they don't require agriculture. There've been actually a couple of sightings right on the Riding Mountain boundary and a couple of different directions, and one sign at Whitewater Lake there of dramatic damage that looks an awful lot like pig damage to me, and probably was. So a number of occurrences and points of concern there, and this is the kind of damage they can do. Mike says, please explain why hunting a wild boar doesn't work as a control. There are a few reasons why sport hunting not only hasn't been particularly helpful, but is actually one of the reasons why we have pigs occurrences over about 1 million square kilometers, is that if you have a sounder group of pigs running around the landscape, people will shoot at it. And again, in probably something on the order of 98 or 99% of the time, they don't kill all of the animals at once. They're elusive. They're in heavy cover already. My poor dog is dying because she can't get upstairs for some reason. Come here. Hey, come here. Okay, sorry. She cries like she's dying. If you could hear in the background, it sounds like she's dying a slow death, but she just wanted to get on the other side of a door. So people shoot pigs, and it sort of makes intuitive sense that if you remove animals, the population goes down. And so why it's been a tough sell is that so rarely will you ever remove an entire group of pigs, and they reproduce so quickly that these scenarios happen on the prairies every day, where you hear stories like, we found 6 pigs, we shot 3, and the next year we found 15 and we shot 8, and the next year we found 22 and we shot 19 of them, or these high numbers, and you're taking 50, 60, 70% of the population, but it's still going up. And so the reproductive rate exceeds the rate of almost anywhere in North America we're aware of, that sport hunting of pigs is really only takes, perhaps the highest I've ever heard of in North America was 23% in a year. And you probably need to be doing at least 90%. If you're taking 80%, the population might start to level off. It won't go down, but it's not going up as quickly. So 80% is sort of a minimum just to start to see any kind of reduction in growth. The only real success story for pigs is when you do whole sounder removal. You find 12, you remove 12. You find 8, you remove 8. And that's really the only path forward for success. And if those ones that survive become way more nocturnal, and of course there isn't legal night hunting, and so that eliminates that option, and they become incredibly elusive and 10 or 20 times harder to find. They get into heavy, ugly riparian cover, they get into cattail marshes, and they just disappear. And so a lot of people have wild pigs that live on the prairies in their back 40 and don't know about it. And so you keep shooting and shoot. And this is effectively, we've done this massive experiment in Canada, right? We've had these farms that were leaky and escapes and releases. And then hunters blasted away at them, and it spreads them around the landscape. So you have 10, you shoot 5, and wow, 5 200-pound pigs seems great, and it is, and again, it is perfectly legal. It's effectively open season on the Canadian prairies, so it's legal to harvest them. But if the goal is, or the notion is, to do eradication, then sport hunting, you kill 5, and those other 5 break up into 2 or 3 groups and run, and they can easily, we've seen them run from Spruce Woods past the Brandon Hills and just keep going west. So they can cover, they can do a marathon in a day easily. And so you break up groups, you spread them around the landscape, make them much more elusive and wary, and then you see more pigs. And so effectively, if you want lots of pigs, release them somewhere and open it up to sport hunting. And that's the lesson learned. And we're seeing that acknowledged now, in the draft national strategy that I looked at there, the discussion was around, and I think many governments are coming around to this as well, this idea that, it makes intuitive sense that sport hunting will help, but in fact, it does not because of the nature of the pigs. Of course, if you want to control elk, the province of Manitoba does a great job of monitoring and flying surveys and riding mountain fly surveys for elk, but because elk will only have one baby at most, twins are effectively unheard of in elk. You have to be very careful you don't overharvest that, and they manage that carefully too, because if you knock it back, it may take many years for those darn elk to come back. Whereas pigs is you have to throw all that thinking away and realize that you just keep killing and killing and killing pigs, and we call that just mowing the lawn or cutting grass. So you can keep hunting and hunting as we've done, and there's widespread hunting across the Canadian prairies and lots of animals being harvested. But we certainly, for many, the goal is eradication. But the reality is that it's going to take a lot more than simply, or not so simply, sport harvesting them. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to flip to my one little demo that I want to do here and show you. I've made a Google Earth file, which if you go to our Facebook page is pinned to the top page. I've got Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta individual files that pop open on Google Earth, and hopefully you can see this. But you click on this file, it will open in iHunter on your GPS. You can open it on any device, your phone, tablet, desktop, laptop, whatever. And it shows the rural municipalities in Saskatchewan here with different colors. And the darker the color, the more pigs. And so Spruce Woods, of course, is this nice, beautiful blue spot. And we can sort of zoom in on it. You can move around, you can pan around. And as I say, this is a free app. There's been some sightings in the Turtle Mountains. And if you actually want to click on one, and it will tell you how many occurrences. So we have the joint count is a total count. So in this particular rural municipality, we have 2,362 occurrences of wild pigs in the RM of Victoria. There's the geographic coordinates and the year. It only shows the year of the most recent one in this file. I need to update these a little bit more, but it's mostly going to be more of the same. But then you can, of course, turn the layer off and you can zoom around and you can actually look closely. The burning question of, are you going to give us this file will load into iHunter? Yes, absolutely. Lots and lots of people have it in iHunter. You just download it off our Facebook page. That's pinned to the very top for whatever province, in this case, probably mostly Manitoba. And so you can download that. And the answer to the question that's inevitably coming is no, we're probably never going to provide more detail than this, mainly to protect landowners. I know for sure in a lot of places that if I went onto our Facebook page or did a tweet and said, oh yeah, there was Joe Smith's farm just south of Treeherne, there's 16 pigs running around the back 40. There'd be a dozen pickup trucks or more within hours racing around looking for them. There's a huge appetite to shoot them. And so that we have to respect landowners, and we don't want to, and we also know that, again, hunting is legal, but it's also not part of a viable long-term solution. So while I support it and recognize it and say it's a value, and hunters have been great to work with my whole career, whether it was elk or deer or caribou in the north or whatever, hunters have been fantastic. But in this particular case, sport hunting is not going to fix it. And indeed, the saying that I use a lot is, you are not going to barbecue your way out of a wild pig problem. And we do have established pigs here. We have reproduction occurring around some areas of the province. So we definitely have a very clear single hotspot. Phoenix, come here. Hey, come here. Oh my God, I think she's been stabbed or something, the way she's crying. Hopefully you're not picking up too much of it. But anyway, that's where I want to stop and take some more questions that people have. We've had a lot along the way. Certainly, if you go back to the first slide of my presentation, which I will do right now, you can see the link, which I posted at the beginning. I'll leave that first page up. I will thank the U.S. Department of Agriculture has funded the overwhelming majority of this. We've been singularly challenged with trying to find funding support much support of any kind, frankly, over many years for pigs. So that has been an uphill battle, but all of this only occurred because of the support of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So it is a little bit embarrassing in the sense that the number one supporter of wild pig research in Canada is the U.S. government. Hopefully we'll see that change. And we just got a fairly nice grant, a collaborative group of ours to work on wild pigs in Alberta, a really nice 5-year grant. And so that's a good step forward. So Alberta has been very, very supportive and keen on that. So hopefully we'll see some of that change. And as we realize more and more about these issues, there's a whole lot more research to do, and really challenging to eliminate. But the Facebook page is there, Wild Pig Research. You can look it up, and it's a super easy download. If something doesn't work, then definitely let me know, but I can show it on here. There we go, Canadian Wild Pig Research Project. And if you just scroll down to the pinned, well, we have a stuffed wild boar called Boris. You can follow him online. I was going to show some capture video, but having some difficulties here. There's some capture video. There's a whole bunch of maps and some funny stuff along the way. But also in this main pinned tweet, you can actually click here and download. There's directions and explanation. You can click on here and simply just download the file for Manitoba. And then, as I say, it'll port into iHunter. Many people email me and say it doesn't work. It does work. Just follow the directions carefully, and you can download your very own map. And there's the legend that explains these are relative scale, but you can, as I say, click on any of the RMs for any of the provinces, and it will tell you, or county, I should say, in Alberta. Click on one and get a snapshot of where they are. It's the finest thing you're going to get. I'm not aware of anybody anywhere in Canada that's been making publicly available maps. So as far as I could tell, we are the only show in town. And so in order to keep this up, what I'm hoping is that people will continue to share their occurrences. And if they shoot one, send us a photo. And so I guarantee that we will never share anything finer than this. And so we'll protect any of those occurrences you share in trail camera photos, or if you see one. A friend of mine called me and said they saw one dead on the side of the highway and GPSed it for me. So shoot me some of those, and hopefully I've not gone too long. I think if we have time, I might be allowed to answer a few more questions. How are we doing? Are people still?
Yeah, you know what? It seems like we still have a lot of people on, and so feel free to answer a few more questions if you have time.
It's a real challenge to keep me talking, but I'll see if I can do my best.
There was one good one that was asking about the control strategies that do work.
Oh, yes. Large panel traps work exceedingly well, and that can be part of a success story around what we call this whole sounder removal. So the big panel traps, like a boar buster, is really, really good. There's only a few posts in the ground, and the whole trap lifts up off the ground. And so when pigs are seeing bait like corn and other things on the ground, they have a visual, they can see there's no obstructions really. And so they come into there, and then it triggers the video to start, and you're watching on your phone at home or in your truck, and it triggers, there's some activity, and you see pigs, and you know from your pre-baiting and your monitoring of trail cameras, you know there's 11 pigs in this group, and we know it's 11. And so you watch them coming in, and you're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and boom, well, you've got the whole group in there. And it doesn't always work that well, but the ideal scenario is 11 walk in, drop the trap, and you've just done a whole sounder removal. These traps are susceptible to yahoos. People find out where you are. They see the same white truck going to the same spot, and they follow you in. We have a number of, and as you know, with some of these things, it takes one person to wreck it for everybody, but we've actually borrowed done truck swapping and rented trucks, and just to try and driven different areas around grid roads to keep people from finding them. But people go in, they know if you've got a trap, there's probably pigs there, so they'll go and shoot it up and wreck it. And then your chances of getting pigs are zero, so you have to move it. So setting up, pre-baiting, building these traps, and hoping pigs show up is not a small challenge. It's a lot of work, a lot of time, and occasionally a fair bit of heartache and heartbreak. And so that is one strategy that can be highly effective. So you need lots of these traps. Helicopter capture is something we've pioneered here in Canada, and indeed people in the US were asking us yesterday about bringing it in. Capturing pigs with net gun ton of net gun work done as part of my research on elk, and we sort of, I think we're the first group to use a net gun on elk at Riding Mountain for our collaring work, and found that worked really well. So net gun capture can be highly effective. Manitoba, just a part of, or pardon me, swapping provinces here. Saskatchewan, in their announcement, mentioned they're regulating now. Pigs will be regulated as pests, and that opens up, I understand, some options with respect to poison. There are a couple of big red flags that come up around poison, and I have some real concerns about that, and around, perceptions of, like, strychnine, for example. It can be effective for different animals, including pigs, and it's used in Alberta to kill wolves and that sort of thing. But it is literally the worst way to die. I don't know that you can come up with, maybe if you thought long and hard, but it's certainly among the worst ways to die. And so poison is potential, and the U.S. has done a ton of work over many years and spent millions of dollars trying to get a nitrite-based poison approved in the U.S. for pigs. And that, the big challenge with poison, of course, as well, and we know this from 100 years ago, wolf work across Manitoba, is that non-target animals. And so you put out bait to kill pigs, and you find some dead pigs, but you find 2 dead raccoons, 3 dead foxes, a dead wolf, 3 dead coyotes, a black bear near death, and a whole bunch of birds scattered around. That's obviously extreme. It's not like that, but the notion that they can impact lots of non-target animals is a major challenge. The work around the US has been developing is that we know pigs have really long, strong noses. And so by having a heavy plate over top of these baits, then it takes a pig nose to lift up the heavy plate to get at the bait, and then it will slam shut after they're done. And so that will ideally keep out most. Black bears are going to be a challenge no matter which way you slice it. There is no one magic silver bullet. If you're only trapping, you're not going to succeed. You're not going to eradicate. There is no one single tool that's going to get you there. You have to take an integrated approach that brings in all of those tools in the toolbox. There is a group of eradication team. There's a small park in southeastern Saskatchewan called Moose Mountain, very close to Manitoba, and cattle producers there, under their own initiative and with their own money, went in and were with support from aircraft. They have a crazy pilot that supports them as well, but they go in, and they are not a team of hunters. They're an eradication team. They have a very detailed strategy. We're going to meet at the Esso at 9 o'clock, and nobody knows where they're going, because initially they said, well, yeah, we're going to go hunt Fish Lake, and then they'd show up to do it, and somebody had actually gone ahead of them and shot it all up. And so it's all covert. It's all, okay, we'll meet here and then follow us to the spot. And they have worked it out a lot, and it takes a lot of and it is totally different than hunting. It is nothing related to hunting. Many hunters just want one for the freezer, which is, again, perfectly fine, but that is going to contribute nothing to eradication, and certainly will continue to be part of the problem. It's not a popular thing to say, I know, but I think that if one wants to eradicate wild pigs, I've said many times, you can choose. You can either have sport hunting of pigs, or you can have eradication. You can't have both. And so that's a real challenging decision that the government may have to think about down the road, but that's a big one because it's been around for so long. So it's really, really hard. So there are a lot of challenges there. There is no easy solution. They do keep coming back the more you remove them. Phoenix, come here. Something must be supper time. I think everybody's having supper because she's usually not whining her pants off to get out of here. She usually lounges around and follows me wherever I go. So thanks so much, everyone, for your attention. I think that's probably it for comments. There's a ton of discussion around this on our Facebook page. I'm constantly tweeting out, but most importantly, if you see a pig, report a pig. And think about it much like 911. If you look out a window and you see your neighbor's house on fire, you don't say, oh yeah, remember to call 911. You drop whatever you're doing, you call 911 and you call in the experts. This is, there's a few things we've learned about wild pigs. One of them is it's not a DIY situation. There is I mean, people can hunt them, and people have across the prairies have dabbled in trapping, many doing it illegally without any kind of permit. Definitely reach out to your local conservation officer before you try any DIY stuff, because I can't speak to the details, but I certainly wouldn't be going out trying any of these ideas. It is open season for hunting, but in terms of, say, you want to build a better mousetrap and catch some pigs, then you would, I think I would be fair to say, probably need permits and some other approvals, and talk to your local CO for information for sure. But yeah, that's a quick snapshot of pigs and sort of some ideas of what I think about and what works well. Reach out to me by email, send us a message on Facebook, or post questions to our Facebook page. We get lots and lots of sightings. People share photos. I shot a pig here. I found that. So lots and lots of options there. So thanks, everyone. And thanks so much for the invitation to speak to you today, and virtually visit back to my home province of Manitoba. So thanks.
Well, thank you, Dr. Brook, so much for joining us today. And thank you all for coming in and enjoying this wonderful webinar. It was extremely informative. I greatly appreciated it. And we have many, many comments here saying what a fantastic job and so much information and expertise, and thanking you for your time. We would also like to encourage everyone to sign up for any of our other webinars and park events. Event details are always available on our Manitoba Parks Facebook page or online at manitobaparks.com. And again, thank you, Dr. Brook, so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. My poor dog will get upstairs now and be
Get
safe.
a good snuggle now. There you go.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, everyone. Good to see you all, and have a great night.